backlash against the government's decision to slash foreign aid is growing following Chancellor Rishi Sunak's spending review.
The Chancellor announced our overseas aid budget will be cut by a third, saying it was difficult to justify to the British people when we're dealing with a debt crisis at home.
That decision to cut the spending comes despite pressure from a number of people, including Nicola Sturgeon, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Nobel Prize winner and activist Malala, but also former Prime Ministers Tony Blair and David Cameron, and, of course, the Foreign Office Minister, Lady Sugg, who has quit over the move.
So is foreign aid money better spent at home? Joining us now to discuss this is journalist Ian Burrell, who says it's absurd to borrow money and not spend it domestically, and writer and political scientist Elif Shafak, who believes it's wrong to isolate ourselves and cut overseas support. Good morning to both of you this morning. Thank you for joining us. Elif, if we can start with you. That quote that Susanna read out in the introduction that the Chancellor made yesterday, that it's difficult to justify to the British people when we are dealing with a debt crisis at home, undoubtedly is going to resonate and does with the vast majority of our viewers this morning. We've been running a poll to say, is it better to spend the money at home? The last time we looked, it was over 90% agreed with that. How can you persuade some of those people that actually foreign aid being spent abroad is a hugely important part of the British standing, but equally for those countries that receive the benefit of it?
Yes, good morning. It all depends on how we frame the question. We're living at a time when country after country has been witnessing the rise of a very populist narrative. And one thing that populist narratives do is to boil down everything into dichotomies, dualities. For instance, populist narrative asks, are you pro-safety and security, or do you defend refugees? As if you can't do both at the same time. But in fact, you can. You can be pro-safety, pro-security of a nation and defend a sensible immigration policy. Likewise, when it comes to foreign aid, again, we're presented with a duality, which in fact is a false duality. So within that dichotomy, we are asked, do you defend that this money should go to people in need in the UK, or do you defend that the money should go elsewhere? When it's posed like that, we can't get anywhere because the duality itself is false. You know, we can defend both. We can defend that there should be more benefits, help, urgent help for people in need in the UK because we're going through unprecedented times and people are suffering, and at the same time continue to defend foreign aid.
OK, but if we're going to save $4 billion by this cut in foreign aid, I appreciate it's quite a simple duality, but people will think, well, we could very much do with $4 billion extra spent here at home.
Of course, if you only focus on the 4 billion, that is the case. But if you focus on a budget, governments make decisions and they decide how they're going to spend the money, where they're going to spend the money. I don't want to get into a very, very politicized debate. But if you pose the question differently, for instance, saying, do you defend cutting taxes from big corporates, from the richest? Or do you defend sending money to the poorest in the world, which is also good for the UK, not only for those people, and I hope we will get into that discussion.
Well, we haven't got very long on the discussion, Elif, so I just wonder whether you can tell us, because so many people here need help, because there is a public sector pay freeze, because more than 2.5 million people by next year are likely to have lost their jobs, how is it good for the UK to continue spending so much money abroad, particularly to countries like India and China, which can well support their own?
Foreign aid is very complicated. It's not only about money. We're talking about primarily humanitarian crisis. We're talking about sanitation, hygiene, the education of girls, peace building, emergency crisis. For instance, the UK helped with the immunization of millions of children. All of that, this is a very, very complex subject. Where I come from, Turkey, for instance, has 4 million refugees, Syrian refugees. EU sends money to Turkey. When you cut off such monies, it has repercussions. It has massive political as well as humanitarian repercussions. So there are two levels. Okay. One is the humanitarian level, which interests me the most as a writer, but also for practical, pragmatic and political reasons.
Yeah. It's like soft power, isn't it?
Let's go to Ian on that, because Ian, undoubtedly we're in the middle of this pandemic, a global pandemic, and what we're desperately trying to do is get control of this virus, or try and get the virus into a position where we can go back to our lives as normal as possible. And as Elif has just pointed out, this money is used in healthcare, it's used in sanitation, it's used in immunisation. Undoubtedly, some of this money will be used to help support vaccines in smaller countries that can't potentially find the money for a vaccine for coronavirus. By taking it away, we are risking not being able to try and exert a bit of control onto coronavirus globally, which we so desperately need.
Well, the other thing we have to accept is that the coronavirus has made setback poverty and setback diseases like fighting malaria and tuberculosis in the developing world hugely. My issue isn't that I think we should spend the money at home in some kind of binary choice against spending it abroad. My issue is that actually I don't think the aid is doing any good in many cases, and in a lot of cases it's actually doing harm. We're fueling conflict, we're assisting corruption, and we're undermining democracy. It's what the economist Angus Deaton, who won a Nobel Prize for his work in measuring the metrics of poverty around the world, he calls it the aid illusion, the idea that you spray money around the world and it instantly makes it better. Unfortunately, in a lot of places which need aid, they don't have the conditions where their countries and their systems can handle the aid. And all it means is that a few rich people get even richer, and it helps the bank accounts in Switzerland and the tax havens, but it doesn't actually help people on the ground. It doesn't help the poor.
Ian, why do we give so much to India and China when those governments are perfectly capable of supporting their own populations?
Well, the logic is that actually a lot of the people, the world's poor, are found in places like India and China. I agree, it is absurd that we give money, say, to China, which this week launched a space mission to bring back lunar samples for the first time in almost half a century. It's absurd also that they have their own aid industry themselves. They actually have an aid agency which spends money around the world. So we're borrowing money to give to China, a really brutal totalitarian regime which is practicing genocide against Muslim minorities in the east of the country. And they themselves are giving money away to other countries. It is a symbol of the absurdity. But also ask yourself, as Rory Stewart, the former aid minister, did, why have we given 4.5 billion pounds to the small population of Malawi in southern Africa, and yet they've got poorer and they're still one of the world's poorest countries? The trouble is we give away globally, it's not just Britain, lots of other countries give away aid. There is something called the poverty gap, which is the amount it would take to push everyone in the world over the poverty line. And actually that's half the amount given away each year in aid. The facts show aid does not work. Okay. And we need to find better ways to help the world's poor, of which there are lots of things we could do.
OK. That, unfortunately, is not a debate we can get into now, but we are going to be talking to the Chancellor about his decision to cut foreign aid, much to the disappointment of Elif. Thank you very much indeed, Ian Birrell and Elif Shurafak. Yeah, we've been running this poll this morning. Let's have one last look at it. We asked you if foreign aid is better spent at home. It's now 89% of you saying yes, 11% saying no. So that's gone up slightly on the nose, but still convincing.